Imagine a world where the majority of people live in the shadows of false gods, their lives shaped by beliefs crafted by their own hands. A time when humanity, once united, now faces confusion, division, and deep spiritual darkness. This was the aftermath of the fall of the Tower of Babel, a single, monumental event that scattered the people of the earth, creating linguistic and cultural divides. The result was a world filled with a multitude of gods, each one pulling the hearts and minds of people in different directions. But what if I told you that from this chaotic scattering, one man's faith would rise as a beacon, not only changing his own life, but shaping the fate of entire nations? His name was Abraham, and his story is one of profound transformation. Born into a world consumed by idolatry and pagan worship, Abraham's early life was set against a backdrop of false beliefs. Raised in the city of Ur, a place steeped in idol worship, it would have been almost impossible for him to escape the influence of the gods of his time. Yet, despite the overwhelming presence of idols around him, there was something within Abraham that called out for a deeper understanding, a desire for something greater than the gods worshipped by his ancestors. The story of Abraham begins not with grand achievements or a divine call, but with the simple act of listening. He heard a voice, a call from a God that he had never known, telling him to leave his family, his country, and his past behind. This wasn't an easy request. Abraham wasn't just leaving behind a place he called home. He was leaving behind everything he had known, everything that had shaped his identity up until that point. And yet, with faith in his heart, Abraham chose to obey. He ventured into the unknown, stepping out in faith, not knowing what awaited him. His journey wasn't without its struggles. He faced famine, conflict, and uncertainty. But through it all, Abraham trusted in the promise that was given to him. A promise that, despite the vast challenges ahead, he would be the father of many nations. A simple man, raised among idolaters, had now become the chosen one, the one whom God would use to begin a new chapter in the story of mankind. Abraham's faith wasn't perfect. There were moments of doubt, times when he questioned the promise made to him. In one instance, after years of waiting for a son, he and his wife Sarah resorted to taking matters into their own hands, leading to the birth of Ishmael. Yet even in those moments of uncertainty, God's promise remained unchanged. Abraham was reminded time and again that God's timing was not his own, and that his plans were far greater than anything Abraham could imagine. Throughout his life, Abraham would face numerous tests of faith. One of the most profound came when God asked him to sacrifice his beloved son, Isaac. This moment of trial was the ultimate test of Abraham's trust in God. It wasn't just about obeying a command, it was about surrendering everything: his son, his promise, and his future. And yet Abraham did not hesitate. His faith remained unwavering, even in the face of an impossible choice. As Abraham's story unfolds, it becomes clear that his journey was not just about him. His faith would become the foundation for the generations that followed. Through Isaac, his son, and Jacob, his grandson, the lineage of Abraham would continue, and the promise made to him would ripple through history. His descendants would become the people of Israel, a nation chosen to bear witness to the one true God and to be a light to the nations. Abraham's journey, however, was not just a physical one. It was a journey of transformation. Through his obedience, his faith, and his willingness to trust in God's plan, Abraham became the father of a new faith, one that would change the course of history. His faith didn't just alter his own life, it set into motion a chain of events that would lead to the birth of a nation, a people, and ultimately, a savior who would bring hope to the world. Abraham's life is a testament to the power of faith. It is a story of how one man, raised among idolaters, could be used by God to change the course of history. His story reminds us that no matter where we come from, no matter the challenges we face, our faith has the power to shape not only our own lives, but the lives of those around us. Abraham's faith in the God of the impossible is a challenge to us all. To trust in the promises of God, even when the road ahead seems uncertain, and to believe that through our obedience, God can use us to impact the world in ways we never imagined. So, as we reflect on Abraham's life, we are reminded that his journey was one of faith, perseverance, and divine purpose. It was a story of how a simple man with nothing but faith and trust in God could change the course of history. And as we stand on the shoulders of those who have gone before us, may we be inspired to live with the same unwavering faith that Abraham displayed, a faith that has the power to change the world. In the land of Ur, nestled between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, a child was born into a world that seemed far removed from anything we would consider sacred today. This was the land of the Chaldeans, a place where idols were carved from stone and wood, where people bowed down to gods they had created with their own hands. Ur was a city thriving in its prosperity, but its prosperity was built on a foundation of false beliefs. It was in this world of idols and false gods that a child was born. Abram, a boy whose faith would one day lay the foundation for a new faith and a new covenant with God. The world around him was steeped in spiritual darkness, yet within this boy was the seed of something far greater. It was a faith that would eventually redefine the very purpose of humanity. Abram's family, led by his father Terah, was no different from the rest of the people of Ur. They too were steeped in the culture of idolatry, worshiping the gods of the land. Terah, like many others in Ur, likely believed that the gods controlled every aspect of his life, his wealth, his health, his future. However, even in this world of uncertainty, Terah had a dream, a vision of something beyond what he had known. He decided to move his family westward, towards Canaan, the land of promise that he had heard of. It was a journey that symbolized hope, a desire for something more, something better than what Ur had to offer. But the road to Canaan was long and filled with obstacles. When they arrived at Haran, Terah and his family settled there instead, perhaps because the land was more familiar, more secure. It wasn't the land that God had promised, but it was enough for Terah. However, it was in Haran, not in Canaan, that God's call would finally come. Terah's journey, it seemed, was not the one that would lead to the fulfillment of the promise, but rather, it would be the journey of his son Abram that would alter the course of history. And so, the real journey was about to begin, not for Terah, but for Abram. The call came to Abram in the midst of his life, just as he had settled in Haran. One day, God spoke to him, a voice calling him out from the familiar into the unknown. "Leave your country, your people, and your father's household," God said, "and go to the land I will show you." It was a call to faith, a call to step out of everything he had ever known and trust in a promise that was beyond his comprehension. In that moment, Abram's life changed forever. He was not asked to understand the journey ahead, only to take the first step. And it was through that first step of faith that God would begin to unfold the story of redemption for the entire world. What would compel a man like Abram, raised in a family of idolaters, to leave everything behind? The answer lies in the calling that was placed upon his life. Abram's journey would not just take him to a physical destination, but to a deeper understanding of who God was and what it meant to trust in him. It was not just a journey to a land, it was a journey to faith. As we consider Abram's beginnings, we see that his story was not one of immediate greatness, but of faith and obedience. He was a man who heard God's call, and in response, he chose to obey. Little did he know that this act of faith would set into motion a plan that would change the world. Through him, God would build a nation, a covenant people, and a promise that would span generations. All of this began with a single step of faith, taken by a man whose background was anything but divine. And so the journey of Abram begins not with a mighty declaration, but with a quiet, steadfast obedience, a willingness to trust in a God who had called him from the familiar into the unknown. At the age of 75, when most people are thinking of settling down, reflecting on the life they've lived, and enjoying the comforts of familiarity, Abram's life was about to take a dramatic turn. He was called by God, not in the way most people might expect, but through a command that required not just action, but deep, unwavering faith. God told Abram to leave everything behind, the land, the people, and even his father's household, and go to a land that was yet unknown to him. It wasn't just a call to travel, it was a call to trust. Abram's journey wasn't simply geographical, it was spiritual. It was as though God was saying, I want you to leave the world you know and follow me into a future you cannot yet see. For Abram, this wasn't about moving to a nearby city or even a neighboring country. It was about stepping into the unknown with nothing but God's word and a promise that had yet to be fulfilled. But despite the uncertainty, Abram obeyed. He didn't ask for explanations or a map to guide his way. He didn't inquire about how long the journey would take or whether he would ever find peace in the land God promised him. Abram simply packed up his belongings, said goodbye to his family, and set off. The promise God made to Abram was as radical as the command to leave. God didn't just ask Abram to go. He made a promise that would shape Abram's life and the lives of countless others. He told Abram that he would become the father of a great nation, that his name would be famous, and that through him all the families of the earth would be blessed. These were no small promises. In fact, for a man of Abram's age, with no children and no clear legacy, they must have seemed impossible. But God didn't offer a list of conditions. He didn't say, if you do this, then I'll bless you. Instead, God simply declared that this was his plan for Abram's life. A plan that would take shape through Abram's obedience. What does it take to follow a calling like this? What does it take to step out in faith when you don't know what lies ahead? Abram's journey wasn't just about physical distance. It was about trusting in a God whose ways were beyond human understanding. God's promise was huge, but it came with no immediate guarantees. Abram wasn't told how long he would have to wait, or what he would encounter on the journey. The promise wasn't something that would be fulfilled overnight. And yet, despite the uncertainty, Abram stepped forward in faith. He didn't let fear or doubt control him. He trusted in the promise of a God who had called him to something greater than himself. At the age of 75, Abram left behind everything he knew. The security of family, the comfort of his homeland, and the familiar surroundings that had defined his life. What does it take to leave behind everything and trust that something better awaits, even when you can't yet see it? Abram's faith was extraordinary, not because he knew everything that would happen, but because he believed in a promise from a God who could not lie. He didn't have all the answers, but he had faith that God would be faithful. And so Abram's story began with a simple but profound act of obedience. God's call to Abram wasn't just a call to leave. It was a call to trust in a future he couldn't yet comprehend. It was a call to believe that God's promises, though distant, were worth following, even in the face of uncertainty. Abram's faith became the foundation for everything that followed. The formation of a nation, the beginning of a covenant, and the eventual blessing of the world through his descendants. As we reflect on Abram's obedience, we are reminded that faith isn't always about understanding the entire journey ahead. Sometimes, faith is simply about taking the first step, trusting that God's promises are enough to guide us through the unknown. Abram's call wasn't just a personal invitation. It was the beginning of something much greater than he could have ever imagined. It was the start of a divine plan that would not only change his life, but also the course of history for generations to come. Abram's journey to Canaan was not a simple one. It wasn't just about moving from one land to another. It was about stepping into the fulfillment of a divine promise, even when that promise seemed so distant. As Abram traveled, he was constantly reminded of God's presence through the altars he built. These altars weren't just structures made of stone. They were symbols of his relationship with God, moments of worship and recognition of the divine guidance that led him every step of the way. Each altar he built marked a new chapter in his journey, a testament to the trust he had in the God who had called him. It was through these altars that Abram acknowledged the significance of the promises made to him and the covenant that was being established. Along the way, God appeared to Abram, confirming the promise he had made, that the land of Canaan would be given to Abram's descendants. This wasn't just an assurance for Abram, it was a declaration of a future hope. The land, the promise, and the covenant were all tied to something much bigger than Abram himself. It wasn't just about receiving a piece of land. It was about God setting the stage for the birth of a nation, a people who would bear his name and live by his commands. Abram, though living in tents and wandering through a foreign land, was the inheritor of a promise that spanned generations. God's presence with Abram was a sign of his faithfulness and an affirmation that the path he had chosen was indeed the right one. But even for Abram, faith wasn't always a smooth journey. There were moments of uncertainty and fear, moments when the pressure of circumstances caused doubt to creep in. A famine struck the land of Canaan, and Abram, like anyone in such a crisis, was faced with a difficult choice. He could remain in the promised land, trusting that God would provide, or he could take matters into his own hands. In that moment of doubt, Abram made the decision to travel to Egypt, seeking refuge from the famine. It was a decision born out of fear and necessity, but it also marked a moment of weakness in Abram's faith. This is where we see a profound truth about faith. Even the strongest of faiths can falter under pressure. In the face of hardship, when the promises of God seem distant or uncertain, it is easy to make decisions driven by fear rather than trust. Abram wasn't immune to this struggle. He too wrestled with doubt, and in his moment of doubt, he sought refuge in a place that wasn't part of God's plan for him. But this was not the end of Abram's journey, nor was it the end of God's promise. Even in Abram's faltering faith, God's mercy and grace were evident. God did not abandon Abram when he made his decision to go to Egypt. In fact, God continued to guide Abram even in his moments of doubt. It's in these moments that we realize that faith is not always about perfection. It's not about having unwavering trust in every circumstance. Rather, it's about the willingness to turn back to God when we stray, to seek his forgiveness and guidance when we falter. God's mercy shows up not when we are perfect, but when we are broken and humble enough to admit our need for his help. And it was in Egypt that God reminded Abram of his promise, reaffirming the covenant despite the mistakes Abram had made along the way. The story of Abram's journey to Canaan is one of both triumph and struggle. It's a reminder that faith is not always a straight path. There are moments of doubt, fear, and even failure. Yet God's promises remain true, even when we falter. Just as God was with Abram in the land of Canaan, building altars and reaffirming his promise, he was also with Abram when he went to Egypt. His faith may have wavered, but God's faithfulness never did. As we reflect on Abram's journey, we are reminded that faith is not about being perfect. It's about trusting in a God who is perfect, who is always faithful, even when we are not. Abram's story is a testament to the fact that even when we make mistakes, God's mercy and grace are more than enough to bring us back to the path he has set for us. And as Abram continued on his journey, he would come to understand that God's promises are not dependent on our perfection, but on his unchanging faithfulness. As Abram and Sarai journeyed into Egypt to escape the famine, they entered a world far more dangerous than the one they had left behind. Egypt was a land of great power and influence, a place where Abram's life and the lives of those he loved could easily be threatened. Abram, aware of the beauty of his wife Sarai, feared that the Egyptians would kill him in order to take her as their own. In his fear, Abram made a decision that would haunt him, the decision to lie. He told the Egyptians that Sarai was not his wife, but his sister. This lie, though born out of fear, set off a chain of events that would lead to consequences neither Abram nor Sarai could have anticipated. Pharaoh, upon hearing that Sarai was a woman of such beauty, took her into his palace, intending to make her his wife. The consequences of Abram's lie were immediate. Sarai, a woman of great grace and dignity, found herself in a foreign king's court, unaware of what would happen next. Pharaoh, however, was unaware of the truth behind Abram's words, and so the situation seemed to be unfolding according to Abram's plans until the plagues began. God, in his mercy and faithfulness, intervened. Pharaoh, who had been unknowingly acting in disobedience by taking Abram's wife, was struck with plagues that brought calamity to his house. The Egyptian king soon realized that something was wrong and that the cause of his suffering was tied to the woman he had taken into his palace. In that moment of revelation, Pharaoh confronted Abram, asking why he had lied. "Why did you say she was your sister?" Pharaoh demanded. "Now, take her and go." In that moment, God's mercy was evident. Despite Abram's lack of trust in God's protection, despite his failure to act with courage and integrity, God stepped in. Pharaoh released Abram and Sarai without harm, and they were allowed to leave Egypt. This moment was not only a revelation to Abram, but also a profound demonstration of God's grace. Despite Abram's fear and his decision to deceive, God's promise was still intact. God did not abandon Abram in his moment of weakness. Instead, he protected him, ensuring that the covenant made with Abram would not be undone by his failings. The story of Abram's lie in Egypt serves as a powerful reminder that God's faithfulness is not based on our perfection. Abram's faith faltered in the face of fear, and his actions were far from honorable. Yet God did not withdraw his protection or cancel the promise he had made. God's mercy shines through even when we make mistakes. It is not our perfection that determines God's faithfulness, but his unchanging nature and his commitment to his promises. God's grace is not something we can earn or lose based on our actions. It is a gift that remains, even when we falter. For Abram, this experience in Egypt was a turning point. It revealed to him that God's faithfulness was not contingent on his ability to always make the right decisions. Despite Abram's mistakes, God remained steadfast in his commitment to him. God's intervention in Egypt was a clear demonstration that God is always at work, even when we don't understand his methods, even when our actions fall short of his standards. Abram learned that faith is not about perfection. It is about trust. Trust that God will guide us even when we take missteps. Trust that his plans will not be thwarted by our failures, and trust that his mercy is greater than our weaknesses. In that moment of failure, God didn't reject Abram. Instead, he protected him, provided for him, and reaffirmed his promise. As we reflect on Abram's failings and God's mercy, we are reminded that none of us are perfect. We all have moments of fear, doubt, and even sin. But just as God showed mercy to Abram in Egypt, he extends the same mercy to us. His faithfulness is not based on our ability to get everything right, but on his promise to never leave us or forsake us. The story of Abram reminds us that no matter how many times we falter, God's mercy will always be there to restore us, to guide us, and to keep his promises to us. This chapter in Abram's life is a powerful testimony to the truth that even when we fail, God's grace is sufficient. His protection and faithfulness are not dependent on our perfection, but on his unfailing love and commitment to his covenant. And just as Abram's story didn't end with his failure in Egypt, neither does ours. God's mercy is always greater than our mistakes, and his promises are always true, no matter where we find ourselves in the journey. As Abram's wealth grew, so did his relationship with his nephew Lot. The two had journeyed together, united by family ties and shared faith, but their growing prosperity began to cause tension between them. Abram, having followed God's call into an uncertain future, was blessed with flocks, herds, and servants. So was Lot, who had also prospered in the same land. However, with their increase in possessions came a problem. The land could no longer support both of them. Their herdsmen began to quarrel over the land, each vying for the best pastures and resources. It was clear that for peace to be restored, they would need to separate. This moment of tension revealed a deeper issue. The choices they faced were not just about land, but about values. Lot, witnessing the fertile plains of the Jordan River, saw an opportunity to maximize his wealth. He chose the lush, well-watered land near the city of Sodom, a region known for its abundance. On the surface, this seemed like a logical choice. The land was rich, the prospects were promising, and the material benefits were immediate. But what Lot failed to consider was the moral and spiritual implications of his choice. Sodom, despite its apparent prosperity, was known for its wickedness and corruption. Yet, in his pursuit of material gain, Lot chose the land that would eventually lead him into conflict, destruction, and loss. On the other hand, Abram's response was markedly different. Instead of fighting for the best land or insisting on his right to the prime territory, he offered Lot the first choice. "Let's not have any quarreling between you and me," Abram said, "for we are close relatives." He could have easily claimed the best land for himself, given his position as the elder, but he didn't. Abram trusted in God's promise, which had already assured him that his descendants would inherit the land. He understood that God's provision was not tied to the fertility of the soil or the abundance of material wealth. For Abram, peace was more important than profit, and he chose to honor the relationship with his nephew over personal gain. In this moment, Abram demonstrated a generosity and peace that were rooted in faith. By allowing Lot to make the first choice, he showed his trust that God would provide for him, no matter what land he ended up with. Abram's decision was not one of weakness or indecision. It was a bold act of faith. He knew that his inheritance was secured by God's promise, and he was willing to sacrifice material gain for the sake of peace and harmony. Abram understood that sometimes following God's will requires making sacrifices that the world may not understand. While others might chase after what is most beneficial in the moment, Abram chose to prioritize what would bring peace, knowing that God's provision would never fail him. The contrast between Abram and Lot in this moment is striking. Lot's choice reflects a materialistic mindset, a focus on the immediate and visible rewards of the world. He was drawn to the apparent prosperity of the land, without considering the moral and spiritual consequences of living near a city like Sodom. Abram, however, chose peace over profit, showing a heart that trusted in God's long-term promises rather than the short-term gains the world had to offer. It was a choice of faith, one that showed that true wealth comes not from what we accumulate, but from the peace and righteousness we pursue. Abram, trusting God's promise, chose peace over profit. And in doing so, he demonstrated that faith sometimes requires a sacrifice. While the world might have encouraged Abram to fight for what was his, he understood that his true inheritance was secured by God, not by his ability to claim the best land. Abram's heart was set on what truly mattered: honoring God, maintaining peace with others, and trusting in the promise that God had made to him. This decision, though difficult, would ultimately lead to greater blessings and a deeper relationship with God. For us, Abram's response serves as a powerful reminder of what it means to live by faith. When faced with choices between the world's material rewards and the peace of trusting in God's plan, Abram's example encourages us to choose peace, even when it requires sacrifice. True faith is not just about believing God's promises. It is about acting on those promises, even when the world offers us something more immediate or appealing. As we walk through life, may we be reminded of Abram's generous heart, his willingness to trust in God's provision, and his commitment to peace above profit. The peace that Abram had chosen to prioritize was soon shattered by a dramatic and unexpected event. A war of kings erupted in the region, a battle that would reshape the political landscape and alter Abram's life forever. The kings of the cities in the plain, including the powerful and wicked city of Sodom, had rebelled against the king of Elam and his allies. The war was fierce, and after a series of skirmishes, the alliance of kings prevailed, capturing the inhabitants of Sodom, including Lot, Abram's nephew. When Abram received the news that Lot had been taken captive, his heart must have been heavy with both grief and a sense of responsibility. Lot had made his choice to settle near Sodom, but Abram had always seen him as family, and the bond between them was not easily broken. Abram could not simply stand by while his nephew was in danger. Despite the risk, Abram acted decisively. With only 318 trained men, a small force by any standard, Abram set out to rescue Lot. This wasn't just a tactical decision. It was an act of bravery, a declaration that family and loyalty were worth fighting for. Abram pursued the enemy forces, caught them by surprise, and successfully rescued Lot, returning him to safety. The Battle of Kings was more than just a military conflict. It was a powerful moment that demonstrated Abram's courage, his resourcefulness, and his deep sense of responsibility. Abram's victory in rescuing Lot was a powerful testament to his faith in action. With only a small force of men, Abram took on the might of several kings, and against the odds, he was successful. This moment would forever be remembered as a defining moment in Abram's life, a moment that showed his willingness to stand up for what was right, even in the face of great danger. But the story doesn't end with the rescue. After the battle, Abram encountered a mysterious figure, King Melchizedek, the king of Salem, who was also a priest of the Most High God. Melchizedek's appearance was as enigmatic as his name. He was not only a king, but also a priest, a rare combination in the ancient world. Abram, fresh from his victory and the return of his nephew, met Melchizedek, who brought with him bread and wine. Melchizedek blessed Abram, declaring, "Blessed be Abram of the Most High God, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be the Most High God, who has delivered your enemies into your hand." Abram, in turn, gave Melchizedek a tithe, a tenth, of all the spoils from his victory, acknowledging the priest-king's blessing and his role in the victory. This encounter with Melchizedek is one of the most profound and mysterious moments in Abram's life. The blessing that Melchizedek gave Abram was not just a formal greeting. It was a declaration of God's sovereignty over the events that had unfolded. Melchizedek's title, King of Righteousness, underscored the theme of justice and righteousness that permeated Abram's story. In the midst of war, violence, and the brokenness of the world, the blessing of Melchizedek reminded Abram that ultimate authority and justice rest with God alone. Melchizedek was not just a king of a city, but a representative of the righteous rule of God, the King of heaven and earth. Through this encounter, Abram was reminded of the larger cosmic story at play, one in which human kings and empires are ultimately subject to the reign of the Most High God. Melchizedek's blessing affirmed that Abram's victory was not simply due to his own strength or strategy, but was a demonstration of God's sovereignty over the events of the world. This encounter would shape Abram's understanding of God's kingdom, reminding him that even in the midst of conflict, it was God's justice and righteousness that ultimately prevailed. In his meeting with Melchizedek, Abram also demonstrated his humility. He did not take the credit for his victory. Instead, he recognized the divine hand at work and gave a tithe in acknowledgement of God's blessings. This act of giving reflected Abram's understanding that all he had was from God, and that true victory was not just about personal gain, but about aligning oneself with God's purposes. The Battle of Kings and the encounter with Melchizedek are significant not just as historical events, but as profound theological moments in Abram's journey. The battle showed Abram's courage and his willingness to fight for his family, but the meeting with Melchizedek pointed to the greater reality that God's sovereignty and righteousness are the true sources of victory. Abram's story is a reminder that, in the end, it is not our strength, our ability, or our strategies that determine the outcome of our lives. It is God's justice, righteousness, and sovereignty that reign supreme. And just as Melchizedek blessed Abram, so too are we invited to trust in God's reign over all the circumstances of our lives. After Abram's remarkable victory in the Battle of Kings and his meeting with Melchizedek, God came to him once again, reaffirming his covenant and promises. This time, God spoke to Abram in a profound way, renewing his promise of countless descendants, even though Abram had not yet seen the full fulfillment of that promise. The years had passed, and Abram was growing older, but God's word to him remained firm and unchanging. "Do not be afraid, Abram," God said. "I am your shield, your very great reward." Abram, filled with doubt about how this promise would come to pass, asked God, "What can you give me since I remain childless?" Abram's concern was understandable. He had lived a long life and had not yet fathered a son, despite the promises made to him. How could he become the father of many nations if he had no heirs? But God's answer was both simple and profound. He took Abram outside and told him to look up at the sky. "Count the stars. If indeed you can count them, so shall your offspring be." In that moment, God reassured Abram that his descendants would be as numerous as the stars in the sky, a promise so vast that it could not be measured by human standards. It was after this moment of reassurance that God established a covenant with Abram, symbolizing the unbreakable nature of his promise. God instructed Abram to perform a ritual of sacrifice, cutting animals in two and laying them out. As the sun set, a deep sleep fell upon Abram, and in the darkness, God revealed to him the future of his descendants. God told Abram that his offspring would one day be enslaved in a foreign land, but would ultimately return to possess the land of Canaan. The promise was clear. Abram's descendants would inherit the land, and through them, all the nations of the earth would be blessed. This covenant was a profound moment in Abram's life. But perhaps the most significant aspect of this promise was the change in Abram's name. God told him that from now on, he would be called Abraham, meaning father of many nations. This change was not just a new name, it was a transformation in identity, a reflection of the covenant God was making with Abraham. By changing Abram's name to Abraham, God was making it clear that he had chosen him to be the father of many nations, and his promises would be fulfilled through Abraham and his descendants. However, despite the promises and the reassurance from God, the path to fulfilling this covenant would not be a straight one. Over time, Sarai, Abraham's wife, grew impatient. She had heard God's promise that Abraham would be the father of many nations, but she had not yet seen any sign of this promise coming to fruition. She was barren, and the years were passing. In her frustration, Sarai decided to take matters into her own hands. She offered her servant, Hagar, to Abraham, suggesting that he have a child with her in order to fulfill God's promise. "The Lord has kept me from having children," Sarai said, "so go, sleep with my servant. Perhaps I can build a family through her." At first glance, it may have seemed like a practical solution. After all, Sarai's inability to conceive was a barrier to the fulfillment of God's promise. But this decision marked a turning point in the story of Abraham and Sarai. Abraham, in his impatience and desire to have a child, accepted Sarai's suggestion. Hagar became pregnant, and the child she bore was named Ishmael. The birth of Ishmael was a direct result of human efforts to help God fulfill his promises. Sarai's impatience led to a decision that, while seemingly logical in the moment, would lead to pain, conflict, and division. As Hagar's pregnancy progressed, Sarai's jealousy and bitterness grew. Tensions escalated between the two women, and Hagar, feeling the weight of Sarai's harsh treatment, fled into the wilderness. But even in this moment of turmoil, God's mercy was evident. He spoke to Hagar, instructing her to return and submit to Sarai, promising that her son, Ishmael, would also become the father of a great nation. The birth of Ishmael highlights an important lesson about human efforts to help God fulfill his promises. When we try to take control of a situation, especially when we grow impatient with God's timing, we often create more problems than solutions. Although God had promised Abraham a son, the way that promise would be fulfilled was not through human manipulation or shortcuts. Ishmael's birth was a result of taking matters into their own hands rather than waiting for God's perfect timing. The consequences of this decision would ripple through generations. While God would bless Ishmael and make him into a great nation, the tension between Isaac, the son of promise, and Ishmael would lead to conflict. The relationship between the two would reflect the larger spiritual conflict between those who trust in God's timing and those who take matters into their own hands. Abraham's journey of faith is filled with moments of triumph, but also moments of doubt and impatience. The promise of countless descendants would not be fulfilled according to human plans or desires, but in God's time and in his way. And while Abraham and Sarai's attempt to help God along the way created complications, God's mercy and grace continued to guide them, reaffirming that his promises would come to pass, not because of human efforts, but because of his faithfulness. The lesson from this chapter is clear. Faith requires patience and trust in God's perfect timing. Our efforts to help God along the way often lead to complications, but God's promises will always be fulfilled in the way he has ordained. Abraham and Sarai's journey wasn't over yet, and the true fulfillment of God's promise was still to come. The birth of Isaac, the son of promise, would be the next chapter in their story, a chapter that would show that even in our moments of doubt and impatience, God's faithfulness endures. At the age of 99, when most men of his age would have long since given up hope of having children, Abraham sat quietly in his tent, pondering the many years that had passed since God's first promise. He and Sarah had endured decades of longing for a child, years filled with heartache, disappointment, and moments of doubt. The promise that they would have a child seemed almost impossible now. Sarah, at 90, was beyond childbearing years, and the years of waiting had only grown longer. But just when it seemed as though all hope had been lost, God made a visit that would change everything. God appeared to Abraham, once again renewing his promise that Sarah would bear him a son. This time, the message was specific. The time had come, and Isaac, the promised child, would soon be born. As God spoke, Abraham fell face down, overwhelmed by the enormity of the promise. How could this be? How could a man of 99 and a woman of 90 have a child? The very thought seemed impossible in human terms. But with God, nothing is too difficult. Sarah, hearing the promise for herself, laughed, partly in disbelief, partly in joy, and perhaps also out of a deep, guarded hope that had long been dormant in her heart. How could she, an old woman, have a child now? The weight of the years she had spent waiting, only to see others around her raise children while she remained barren, made this promise feel like a dream, too good to be true. But God, with a gentle but firm response, addressed Sarah's laughter, reminding her that nothing is impossible with him. "Is anything too hard for the Lord?" he asked. The words were not just a rhetorical question. They were a reminder of God's limitless power and faithfulness. When all seemed lost, God promised the impossible. The emotional weight of this promise is profound. Sarah and Abraham had experienced the pain of waiting for years, questioning whether they would ever hold their own child. For Sarah, the years of barrenness had been a source of shame, a reminder of what she could not give Abraham. For both of them, the promise of Isaac was not just a child. It was the fulfillment of a hope long deferred, the restoration of their faith, and the beginning of a new chapter that would set into motion the birth of nations. God's promise to Abraham and Sarah wasn't just a promise of a child. It was a declaration that God's timing and plan were perfect, even when the circumstances seemed impossible. The promise of Isaac would not only fulfill their personal longing for a child, but would also pave the way for the establishment of a covenant that would change the world. Isaac would be the son of promise, through whom God's covenant would continue. Through him, Abraham's descendants would become a great nation, and God's plan for redemption would unfold. As part of this covenant renewal, God also changed Sarah's name. She would no longer be called Sarai, which means my princess, but Sarah, which means princess or mother of nations. This change in Sarah's name was not just a formal gesture, it was deeply symbolic. It reflected the transformation of her identity, aligning her name with the future God had promised for her. Sarah's new name was not just a title, but a declaration of the role she would play in God's plan. She, who had once been barren, would now be the mother of nations. Her name change was a reflection of God's faithfulness and his ability to transform even the most hopeless situations. The change in Sarah's name paralleled the fulfillment of God's promises. Just as God transformed Sarah's identity from barren to mother of nations, so too would he transform Abraham's life from a man without a son to the father of many nations. This name change marked a new chapter in their journey, a journey of trust, obedience, and divine timing. Sarah's transformation was a sign of the broader transformation that was unfolding in Abraham's life as well, and it was a reminder that God's promises are not bound by time or human limitations. What had once seemed impossible was now within reach. As Sarah laughed, she did so not out of mockery, but from a place of deep, emotional release. It was a laugh that carried years of unfulfilled dreams and a lifetime of waiting. But it was also a laugh of hope, a hope that had been rekindled by the words of God. Sarah's laughter was not disbelief. It was the joy of a promise finally being fulfilled, of the impossible becoming possible. It was the sound of faith being restored, even after years of doubt. The promise of Isaac's birth was not just about the arrival of a child. It was about the faithfulness of a God who keeps his promises, even when the odds seem impossible. God's visit to Abraham and Sarah was a reminder that no matter how much time has passed or how impossible the circumstances may seem, God's promises never fail. The birth of Isaac would mark the beginning of a new era, the fulfillment of God's covenant, and the launch of a plan that would bring salvation to the world. In the face of impossibility, God's promise to Abraham and Sarah stands as a testament to his ability to bring life from barrenness, hope from despair, and fulfillment from waiting. The birth of Isaac was not just the answer to a prayer, it was the answer to God's plan, which was far greater than anything Abraham and Sarah could have imagined. And as God made this promise to them, he was also preparing the way for a larger fulfillment. A fulfillment that would change the course of history for all of humanity. Abraham's journey of faith, which had already been marked by incredible promises and challenges, reached its ultimate test in a moment that would forever define his trust in God. The promise of Isaac had been fulfilled in a miraculous way. After years of longing, waiting, and the impossible becoming reality, Isaac, the child of promise, was finally born to Abraham and Sarah. He was not just a son. He was the embodiment of God's faithfulness, the fulfillment of a covenant that stretched across generations. Isaac was the key to the future of Abraham's descendants and the promise of a great nation. But now, God was about to ask Abraham for the unthinkable, something that would test the very foundation of his faith. One day, God called to Abraham, and the command he gave was simple yet unimaginable. Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you. This command, piercing through the quiet of the morning, must have been a shock like no other. How could God ask Abraham to sacrifice the very son he had promised, the one through whom the covenant was to be fulfilled? How could the God of life demand such a thing? The weight of this command was staggering. For Abraham, this was not just about following a command. It was about trusting in God's plan, even when it didn't make sense. Abraham had walked with God for years, through promises and disappointments, victories and struggles, but this command was different. God was asking him to sacrifice the son he had waited for, the son he had held in his arms after decades of longing. How could Abraham reconcile his love for Isaac with the command to sacrifice him? Yet, despite the enormity of the request, Abraham did not hesitate. He rose early the next morning, prepared for the journey, and set out with Isaac. The journey to Mount Moriah was one of emotional silence and turmoil. Abraham's heart must have been heavy, filled with an unspeakable grief as he walked beside his son. Isaac, for his part, did not yet understand the full weight of the journey. As they climbed the mountain, Isaac, noticing the fire and the wood for the sacrifice, turned to his father with a question that cut through the silence. "Father, the fire and wood are here, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" In that moment, Abraham's heart must have broken, hearing the innocence of his son's question, yet knowing the painful truth. Isaac's question was a reflection of his trust in his father, a trust that was about to be shattered, at least for a moment, by the reality of what was to come. Abraham's response was simple yet profound. "God will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." These words, spoken with unwavering trust, were not just a reassurance to Isaac. They were a declaration of faith in God's provision. Abraham didn't know how God would provide or what the outcome would be, but he trusted that God's plan was greater than his understanding. In that moment, Abraham's words foreshadowed the ultimate truth, that God, in his time, would provide the true sacrifice, a lamb who would take away the sins of the world. As they reached the top of the mountain, Abraham prepared the altar, bound Isaac, and laid him on the wood. The tension reached its peak as Abraham raised the knife, ready to obey God's command. The silence that must have hung in the air at that moment is almost unimaginable. What could have been going through Abraham's mind as he stood there, knife raised, poised to sacrifice the son he loved? Was it fear? Was it obedience? Was it faith? In that moment, Abraham trusted that God's promise was still valid, even if he couldn't understand how it could be fulfilled. God had promised that Isaac would be the father of many nations, and Abraham believed that God would make a way, even through the most impossible of circumstances. Just as Abraham was about to sacrifice Isaac, God's voice stopped him. "Abraham, Abraham." Abraham, with trembling hands and a heart filled with relief, responded, "Here I am." God spoke once more, saying, "Do not lay a hand on the boy. Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son." In that moment, the test was complete. Abraham's faith had been proven, and God's provision was revealed. As Abraham looked up, he saw a ram caught in a thicket by its horns, a sacrifice provided by God in place of Isaac. Abraham took the ram, offered it as a burnt offering, and named the place, "The Lord will provide." In that moment, God's promise of provision was fulfilled in a way that Abraham could never have anticipated. Isaac was spared, and the covenant was preserved. The sacrifice of Isaac, though it never came to pass, stands as one of the greatest acts of faith in history. Abraham's willingness to obey God, even when it seemed impossible, shows the depth of his trust in God's sovereignty. This moment was not just a test of Abraham's faith, it was a picture of the ultimate sacrifice that would one day come. Just as Abraham was willing to offer his only son in obedience, God would one day offer his only son as the ultimate sacrifice for the sins of the world. The story of Abraham and Isaac is not just a story of faith, it is a foreshadowing of the cross, where God would provide the lamb for the ultimate offering. Abraham's journey to Mount Moriah teaches us that faith is not always easy. There are moments when God asks us to trust Him in ways that are difficult to understand. But it is in those moments when we are asked to give up what we hold most dear that our faith is truly tested. Abraham's response, his willingness to trust God's provision even when the outcome seemed uncertain, shows us what it means to walk by faith and not by sight. And as we look at the story of Isaac's near sacrifice, we are reminded that God's provision is always faithful, even when we cannot see how He will provide. As we reflect on the story of Abraham, one of the most profound truths that stands out is the unshakable reality of God's provision. The name Abraham gave to the place where God spared Isaac, Jehovah-Jireh, means "the Lord will provide." This name speaks volumes about the nature of God. In the moment of greatest uncertainty, when Abraham's faith was tested to its limit, God provided. Not only did He provide a ram to replace Isaac, but He also set the stage for the greatest provision in history, the sacrifice of His own Son, Jesus Christ. Just as Abraham had trusted in God's provision, knowing that God would provide a way, so too did God provide for humanity in the ultimate act of love. The near sacrifice of Isaac prefigures the sacrifice of Christ, the Lamb of God, who was offered for the sins of the world. Isaac's life was spared, but Jesus' life was given, a perfect and final sacrifice for all who would believe. In the story of Abraham and Isaac, we see not only God's faithfulness in the past, but also His eternal provision for humanity. Jehovah-Jireh is not just a name, it is a promise that echoes throughout history, culminating in the cross of Christ. The legacy of Abraham is one that continues to shape the course of history. Though imperfect and at times wavering in his faith, Abraham's trust in God set in motion the fulfillment of God's promises. Through Abraham, the nation of Israel was born, and from that lineage came the Savior of the world. Abraham's story is a testament to the power of faith, to the truth that even in our imperfections, God can use us to change the world. Abraham's faith, despite his struggles and moments of doubt, was the cornerstone of a legacy that still impacts us today. He believed in the promises of God, even when they seemed impossible, and through his faith, all the nations of the earth were blessed. His journey reminds us that faith is not about perfection, it's about trusting in God's faithfulness, even when the road ahead is uncertain. As we look back on Abraham's story, we are called to trust in the promises of God, just as he did. We may not know the path ahead, and we may not always understand how God will fulfill His promises, but like Abraham, we are called to walk by faith, trusting that the same God who provided for him will provide for us. Through Abraham, all the nations were blessed. His journey of faith still calls us to trust in the promises of God today, reminding us that the God who provided for Abraham is the same God who provides for us now and forever.